Standing alone in the shadow of the cold marble pillars within a midtown Manhattan skyscraper, I waited anxiously for my older sister to emerge. My sister Eleanor Vance is a 52-year-old brilliant strategist who has spent 25 years of her life transforming Sterling Corp into a global empire. High above the lobby, the rhythmic popping of champagne corks echoed down the empty halls, while camera flashes flickered like distant lightning from the executive penthouse. Eleanor finally stepped out of the elevator carrying nothing but a small cardboard box containing a few cheap personal items from her decades of dedicated service. The CEO Marcus stood on the mezzanine balcony with his young assistant looking down at her with the triumphant smiles of predators. He contemptuously threw a stack of termination papers over the railing, so they fluttered to the floor like dying birds. "Don't bother looking for a severance check, Eleanor," Marcus shouted, his voice dripping with malice. "You're leaving with exactly what you brought in, nothing." My blood boiled as I tightened my fists to rush up those stairs. "You coward, she built this place," I yelled, but Eleanor stopped me with a strangely calm gaze. Instead of the tears they expected, my sister looked up and flashed a radiant, mysterious smile that made Marcus freeze in sudden confusion. She leaned close to my ear to whisper, "Let him celebrate, Sarah. Their real nightmare begins the very moment my feet cross the threshold of that revolving door." I am the one who witnessed my sister's magnificent journey of retribution, and if you want to discover how a silent expert can topple a greedy empire from the inside out, please subscribe to the channel right now to see how this story unfolds. To understand the weight of that mysterious smile Eleanor gave them in the lobby, you have to look back at the empire she built from the dirt up. The journey to the pinnacle of the financial world did not begin in a high-tech boardroom, but rather within the suffocating dust-clogged walls of a makeshift office in the Newark suburbs. Long before the glass towers and the global recognition, there was only Eleanor Vance and Gregory Sterling, two ambitious souls fueled by cheap coffee and an obsession with market disruption. Eleanor was the undisputed architect of their success, the silent engine who spent her nights meticulously drafting the operational framework and the proprietary source code that would eventually become the backbone of Sterling Corp's dominance. She poured 25 years of her life into this entity, treating the corporation as her own flesh and blood. For over 2 decades, their synergy was the envy of Wall Street, a perfect balance of his charismatic front-end leadership and her brilliant behind-the-scenes strategic mastery. "We're a team for life, Eleanor," Gregory Sterling used to say, raising a plastic cup in that cramped Newark office. "Without your brain, I'm just a guy in a suit." But loyalty has an expiration date when greed enters the room. The bedrock of that partnership began to crumble 3 years ago with the calculated arrival of Alyssa Thorne. Alyssa did not enter the company with a resume of accomplishments, but with a sharp tongue for flattery and a predatory instinct for corporate politics. She was a master of the subtle art of exclusion, using her youth to whisper poison into Gregory's ear about the supposed stagnation of the old guard. Alyssa began planting seeds of doubt, suggesting that Eleanor's methodical precision was a relic of the past. "Gregory, the market moves at the speed of light now," Alyssa would murmur during private late-night drinks. "Eleanor is brilliant, of course, but she's playing a game from 20 years ago. She's not an asset anymore. She's an anchor." The shift in Gregory was an agonizing rot of character. He transitioned from a partner who sought Eleanor's counsel to a cold executive who publicly critiqued her. During a high-stakes strategy session for Project Dawn, the revolutionary initiative Eleanor had nurtured for 5 years, Gregory finally showed his teeth. "Your protocols are too rigid, Eleanor," he snapped in front of the entire board. "Alyssa has a more agile vision for the future. I'm moving you to an advisory role for this phase." Eleanor maintained a mask of professional stoicism. "Agile, Gregory, the code isn't stable enough for the shortcuts she's proposing." Alyssa just leaned back, smiling thinly. "Maybe you're just too tired to see the potential, Eleanor. Let the fresh blood handle the heavy lifting." The betrayal didn't stop there. Gregory began a campaign of restructuring that was nothing more than a thinly veiled purge of Eleanor's most loyal staff. Every veteran employee who understood the true history of Sterling Corp was replaced by a recruit, loyal only to Alyssa. I watched from the sidelines as my sister returned home every evening, her eyes clouded with an exhaustion that no amount of sleep could heal. Despite the blatant injustice, she never uttered a single word of complaint. She silently observed Alyssa Thorne brazenly claiming the corner office privileges Eleanor had earned through decades of sacrifice. Gregory, blinded by a toxic cocktail of arrogance and flattery, grew increasingly disconnected from the technical reality of his own firm. "The company is me now," he told Eleanor during their final private meeting before the firing. "I don't need a co-founder. I need a CEO's assistant, and you're overqualified for that." Eleanor Vance understood perfectly well that she was being systematically erased from her own legacy. She watched as Gregory's ego inflated, fueled by the hollow metrics Alyssa presented to him, while the actual structural integrity of the company began to fray. What they failed to realize in their rush to discard her was that Eleanor had built safeguards into the very foundation of the empire. She knew the location of every digital fault line and the password to every hidden gate. While Alyssa spent her time curating an image of power on social media, Eleanor was quietly preparing for the moment the house of cards would fall. She was not just a departing executive, she was the only person who knew how to keep the lights on when the storm arrived. The betrayal was complete, but the leverage remained entirely in her hands, tucked away in the memories of those early years that Gregory had so conveniently chosen to forget. But possessing the master key to an empire is only useful if you know exactly which locks to turn, and Eleanor Vance began turning those locks precisely 90 days before the corporate guillotine finally fell. The rot inside Sterling Corp remained hidden beneath a veneer of record profits until she stumbled upon a ghost in the machine during a routine integrity check of the central server. Eleanor discovered a series of encrypted financial files that had no business existing within the company's transparent ledger, a digital trail leading directly to a shell corporation registered in Delaware. Her blood ran cold when she decrypted the ownership papers. The entity was held in the name of Alyssa Thorne, designed for the sole purpose of hijacking the billion-dollar Project Dawn. This wasn't just corporate restructuring, it was a heist from the inside. A week later, Eleanor called me to a secluded, dimly lit cafe in the shadows of the Upper West Side. She slid a thick manila folder across the scarred wooden table, her expression as unreadable as a poker player's. "Look at the transaction dates, Sarah," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous frequency. "Gregory Sterling isn't just letting Alyssa take the lead, he's handing her the keys to the vault while they prepare a narrative to frame me for the fallout." I flipped through the pages, my hands trembling as I saw the scale of the fraud. "Eleanor, this is criminal. We need to go to the police right now. This is embezzlement on a global scale." She reached out her fingers, pinning the folder down with authority. "No. Gregory has spent a decade buying the best legal shields money can buy. If we strike now, they'll bury the evidence and paint me as a disgruntled employee. We don't just need to stop them, we need to dismantle them." To achieve that, Eleanor reached out to a ghost from the company's past, Franklin Moore. Franklin was a brilliant security specialist who had been unceremoniously fired by Gregory 2 years prior because he had asked too many questions about certain off-book server migrations. They met in a cramped apartment filled with humming hardware and glowing monitors. "I've been waiting for this call, Eleanor." Franklin Moore admitted, his fingers already dancing across a mechanical keyboard. "Gregory thought he wiped the logs, but he's an amateur. He forgot that every digital shadow leaves a footprint if you know where to look." Over the following weeks, Franklin helped Eleanor bypass the deepest data layers, granting her access to encrypted communications Gregory believed were untouchable. Every night, Eleanor remained in the office long after the cleaning crews had departed, her silhouette, a lonely sentinel against the city skyline. She was meticulously backing up the illegal transaction logs of Alyssa Thorne, documenting every cent stolen from the shareholders. The stakes grew even higher when she uncovered a draft memo hidden in Gregory's private drive. They weren't just planning to fire her, they were preparing to frame her for the very intellectual property theft they were committing. "They want to destroy my reputation so I can never work in this industry again," Eleanor whispered to me one evening. The internal war also brought Eleanor closer to her daughter Megan Vance, a sharp-witted intellectual property attorney with a reputation for being a shark in the courtroom. Their late-night dinners shifted from family gossip to intense legal strategy sessions. "Mom, if we play this right, we're not just looking at a wrongful termination suit," Megan Vance noted, circling a clause in the company's bylaws. "We're looking at a complete hostile takeover of their narrative. They think they're playing checkers, but you've already won the chess match." Eleanor began compiling a massive black file, a comprehensive archive of every ethical breach Gregory Sterling had committed over the last decade. She moved with the silence of a predator, maintaining her stoic demeanor at the office, allowing Gregory and Alyssa to believe she was a defeated pawn. She watched them whisper in the hallways, saw the smug glances they exchanged during board meetings, and felt the chill of their growing arrogance. They were so blinded by their own reflected glory that they never noticed the architect of their empire was now the one placing the charges under its foundation. Eleanor Vance wasn't just preparing for a legal battle, she was preparing for a total eclipse of the Sterling name. She held the master key to their destruction tucked away in an encrypted drive that stayed around her neck, hidden beneath her silk scarf, as she counted down the days to the inevitable confrontation. The invisible countdown began the moment Eleanor decided to stop fighting the inevitable, and instead started engineering the catastrophic collapse of the people who thought they could replace her. During those final 14 days at Sterling Corp, my sister displayed a level of professional devotion that was almost unsettling to witness as she moved through the office with a terrifyingly calm efficiency. She accepted the humiliating task of mentoring Alyssa Thorne through the most complex operational layers of Project Dawn, while maintaining a gentle and completely fabricated smile that disarmed everyone in the boardroom. Gregory Sterling took every opportunity to gloat during our morning briefings, loudly declaring to the stakeholders that Alyssa was the perfect successor who would finally bring the modern agility the company had been lacking under Eleanor's tenure. "You see, Eleanor, the world doesn't wait for those who move at a glacial pace," Gregory remarked, while leaning back in his expensive leather chair during a particularly tense handover session. He remained blissfully ignorant of the fact that every single line of source code Eleanor handed over during those sessions contained a digital Trojan horse hidden within the deep-seated security protocols. Working late into the night with Franklin Moore, she had secretly embedded a self-destruct algorithm that would revoke all administrative access exactly 30 days after her official departure date. Alyssa Thorne was far too blinded by her own sudden ascent to power to bother verifying the intricate security layers that Eleanor had woven into the legacy archives under the guise of routine data storage. "I've reviewed your documentation, Eleanor, but frankly, it seems a bit over-engineered for what we need going forward," Alyssa said with a dismissive wave of her hand while scrolling through the encrypted files. Eleanor simply nodded and offered a helpful suggestion about the integration process that was actually designed to create a massive financial bottleneck in the coming weeks. "I just want to ensure your transition is as smooth as possible, Alyssa, because the board expects nothing less than perfection from you," my sister replied with a voice as smooth as velvet and as cold as ice. During our final strategy discussions, Gregory continued to use demeaning language intended to crush Eleanor's spirit and force her to retreat into a quiet, broken retirement before the official announcement. My sister absorbed every insult with a graceful silence that masked the lethal financial trap she was helping Alyssa finalize within the quarterly strategic forecast. While the executive team celebrated their perceived victory, Megan Vance had already moved behind the scenes to file independent patent applications that solidified Eleanor's personal ownership over the foundational algorithms of the firm. This legal maneuver was executed with surgical precision, relying on forgotten clauses within the original partnership agreement that Gregory had signed 25 years ago in that dusty Newark office. Eleanor eventually signed every corporate handover document they placed in front of her, yet she strategically retained the exclusive copyrights to the core operating methodologies that kept the entire global network functional. On her final afternoon, as the shadows lengthened across the executive suite, Eleanor placed a single unlabeled USB drive on Gregory's mahogany desk as a silent provocation that his arrogance prevented him from understanding. A small parting gift for the man who thinks he has everything, she whispered to herself before gathering her remaining items with a steady hand. She looked back at the glass walls one last time before stepping toward the elevator with the quiet confidence of a woman who had already won the war. The office remained filled with the sounds of Alyssa's laughter and Gregory's self-congratulatory toasts, neither of them realizing that the entire infrastructure of Sterling Corp was now operating on a borrowed clock that Eleanor controlled from her smartphone. I watched as she calmly handed her security badge to the guard, her expression reflecting none of the bitterness that I felt radiating from my own chest at the injustice of it all. We walked out into the crisp evening air of Manhattan, and Eleanor finally let out a long, measured breath that seemed to signal the end of one life and the beginning of a reckoning. She turned to me with a look of absolute clarity and whispered that the most dangerous thing in the world is an expert who has been given nothing left to lose. The revolving door spun behind us, marking the exact second the encryption cycle began its silent crawl through the company's most vital assets, while the city lights flickered around us like distant observers of the coming storm. Eleanor took my hand and led the way toward the waiting car, her mind already moving toward the final phase of a plan that would leave Gregory Sterling with nothing but a mountain of useless paper and a legacy of failure. The transition from the frantic energy of Manhattan to the serene silence of our family garden in the Hamptons felt like stepping into a different reality. For 30 days after Eleanor walked out of the Sterling Corp lobby, she seemed to transform into a woman who had completely forgotten the corporate battlefield. While she spent her mornings meticulously pruning roses and tending to the lush greenery of the estate, Gregory Sterling was busy turning the executive penthouse into a stage for his personal vanity. He orchestrated a relentless series of lavish parties across the city to celebrate the supposed success of Project Dawn without its original creator. Gregory spared no expense as he flaunted his perceived victory, purchasing a private jet and appearing on the covers of major business magazines alongside a gloating Alyssa Thorne. Alyssa constantly invaded my sister's peace by sending taunting emails to her personal inbox filled with screenshots of system performance metrics and arrogant remarks about how the firm was thriving in her absence. One particular message read that the system had never run smoother now that the old guard was finally out of the way. I often paced the porch with my phone in hand, feeling a growing sense of anxiety as I watched those two vultures tear apart everything Eleanor had built over 25 years. Eleanor, they are signing billion-dollar federal contracts using your name and your technology, I said one afternoon while she was calmly watering the hydrangeas. She looked at me with a tranquil expression that made my heart stop for a second, because it was the look of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Patience is a weapon just as sharp as any blade, Sarah," she replied while clipping a withered stem with surgical precision. She reminded me that when the fruit is truly ripe, it requires no effort to harvest, because it simply falls into your hand. Franklin Moore remained our silent eyes inside the digital fortress, sending encrypted updates about the catastrophic mistakes Alyssa was making within the system architecture. Her arrogance had blinded her to the reality of the software, leading her to alter core parameters that she fundamentally did not understand. The executive team was so intoxicated by their sudden wealth that they ignored the escalating series of security warnings flashing on the main servers. Gregory remained convinced that he had legally stripped Eleanor of every intellectual property right when he forced her to sign those termination papers without a penny of severance. He began finalizing massive deals with federal partners, unaware that he was standing on the precipice of a canyon with no safety net below him. Meanwhile, Megan Vance was working tirelessly in a temporary office we had set up in the library, finalizing a mountain of legal filings that would soon change the course of corporate history. She had successfully coordinated with the patent office to ensure that Eleanor's personal ownership of the foundational code remained untouchable despite the corporate handover. They think they bought the house, but they forgot that Mom still owns the land it sits on, Megan Vance noted while highlighting a critical breach in Gregory's latest contract. Eleanor would occasionally sit by the fireplace in the evenings watching a digital countdown timer on her laptop as the seconds ticked toward the 30-day expiration mark. Every time Melissa sent another mocking email, Eleanor would simply smile and add it to the digital archive that Franklin Moore was maintaining for our eventual counterattack. The atmosphere in the Hamptons was one of calculated stillness, a sharp contrast to the chaotic greed that was currently consuming the leadership at Sterling Corp. We knew that the federal partners would not be happy when they discovered they had signed contracts for technology that Gregory no longer had the legal right to operate. Eleanor Vance was no longer just a retired executive. She was the silent architect of a coming storm that would leave no stone unturned in the Sterling Empire. As the final hours of the 30-day window approached, the silence in our garden felt heavy with the anticipation of the inevitable collapse. My sister closed her laptop and looked out toward the Atlantic Ocean, her eyes reflecting a cold and unwavering resolve that told me the games were finally over. The silence of the Atlantic coastline was finally broken by the rhythmic ticking of a digital clock that signaled the exact moment the grace period expired for the empire my sister had built. At precisely 8 o'clock on the 31st morning since Eleanor walked out of the building, every computer terminal within the Sterling Corp headquarters abruptly transformed into a sea of crimson light. Thousands of employees across the Manhattan skyscraper stared in absolute horror as their monitors were locked behind an unidentifiable security protocol that rendered their daily operations completely useless. Project Dawn, which was scheduled to be officially signed into a federal partnership within the next 2 hours, suddenly became nothing more than a massive pile of inaccessible and encrypted garbage. Alyssa Thorne began frantically punching every password Eleanor had provided during the handover, but each desperate attempt only resulted in a flashing notification of a critical and irreversible system failure. "This is impossible. I followed every single instruction she left in the manual." Alyssa screamed at the lead engineer while her hands trembled over the unresponsive keyboard. Gregory Sterling began pacing his office like a caged animal while making dozens of frantic calls to my sister's private number, only to realize that she had blocked him from her life weeks ago. The board of directors eventually stormed into the executive suite, demanding an immediate explanation for the technical catastrophe that was currently causing hundreds of millions of dollars in stock value to evaporate into thin air. "Gregory, if those servers don't breathe in the next 30 minutes, we are taking your head to the shareholders." One of the senior board members roared while slamming a tablet onto the mahogany desk. Franklin Moore walked through the chaotic lobby with the calm demeanor of a ghost, serving as the only observer sent by Eleanor to witness the magnificent collapse of the greedy leadership. The federal partners issued an immediate ultimatum stating that if the systems were not fully restored within the next 60 minutes, they would cancel every billion-dollar contract and initiate a full-scale legal investigation. Alyssa Thorne started screaming at the technical team, blaming their supposed incompetence for the disaster, while Gregory finally realized he had discarded the only mind capable of navigating these deep-seated security layers. "Call her again. I don't care if she blocked you. Find a way to get Eleanor Vance on this line right now." Gregory barked at his assistant while the sweat began to soak through his expensive tailored suit. While the corporate world was burning in a fire of its own making, Eleanor was calmly sipping tea on our porch in the Hamptons while waiting for the inevitable call from the board's lead attorney. Every high-priced technology expert Gregory hired to bypass the encryption found themselves staring at a wall of code that was far too sophisticated for their understanding. The empire Gregory Sterling had spent years trying to steal was now revealed to be a hollow shell standing on the precipice of total and absolute bankruptcy. "The wolves are finally at his door, Eleanor," I said as I watched the news reports showing the chaos unfolding on Wall Street. My sister simply set her teacup down and noted that some lessons in life are only learned when everything you thought you owned disappears in the blink of an eye. Alyssa Thorne was reportedly seen crying in the hallway after the board of directors officially stripped her of all operational authority in a desperate attempt to appease the federal investigators. Gregory Sterling found himself alone in a boardroom that used to echo with his arrogant laughter, but now only offered the cold silence of a dying company. The deep-seated algorithms Eleanor had woven into the architecture were doing exactly what they were designed to do by protecting her legacy from those who tried to monetize it without her consent. We sat in the garden as the afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon, knowing that the real reckoning for Sterling Corp was only just beginning to take shape. Franklin Moore sent a brief encrypted message confirming that the secondary security gates had also locked, ensuring that no one could access the proprietary source code without Eleanor's personal authorization key. The federal partners were already contacting their legal teams to file suit against Gregory for misrepresenting the stability of the company's infrastructure during their negotiations. Eleanor looked toward the ocean and whispered that it was finally time to prepare for the meeting that would decide the fate of the Sterling name forever. The arrogance of those who thought they could replace a master with a puppet was now being corrected by the very technology they had tried to steal from her. The chaos consuming the lower floors of Sterling Corp seemed to freeze in time when the heavy oak doors of the grand boardroom finally swung open at exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon. As the desperation within the headquarters reached a fever pitch, my sister walked into the room with a calm authority that silenced every shouting voice in an instant. Megan Vance followed closely behind her alongside a formidable team of senior attorneys who were carrying several heavy boxes filled with undeniable evidence regarding global intellectual property rights. Gregory Sterling looked up from his seat, his eyes bloodshot and his voice cracking as he tried to maintain a facade of control. "Eleanor, thank God you're here because the system is having some kind of catastrophic glitch, and we need you to fix it immediately," Gregory said while stumbling over his words. My sister didn't even look at the empty chair he offered instead, gesturing for Megan to begin distributing the legal folders to each board member. "I'm not here to fix your mess, Gregory. I'm here to reclaim the house that you tried to steal from me while I was building the foundation," Eleanor replied with a voice that cut through the tension like a razor. Alyssa Thorne tried to interject with a desperate snarl, claiming that the handover was legally binding and that Eleanor was now nothing more than an outsider. "You think a 30-day temporary usage license constitutes a permanent transfer of $1 billion asset, Alyssa?" Megan Vance asked, while sliding a certified copy of the original partnership agreement across the table. The board members began whispering frantically as they realized that Gregory had essentially tricked them into a partnership built on borrowed technology that had already expired. "Gregory, explain this right now, or I swear the next person you talk to will be a federal prosecutor," the chairman of the board roared while slamming his fist onto the mahogany surface. Gregory Sterling turned a ghostly shade of gray, his mouth hanging open as Eleanor began to methodically expose the fraudulent scheme involving the Shell Corporation in Delaware. "You were so busy trying to erase my name that you forgot I wrote the very rules you're currently breaking," Eleanor stated while watching the security team enter the room on the chairman's signal. Alyssa Thorne began to wail in desperation, screaming that she was just following Gregory's orders as the guards firmly gripped her arms to escort her out of the meeting. "Don't touch me. I'm the chief operating officer of this company," Alyssa shrieked, but her titles meant nothing in a room that had finally seen through her predatory charade. The board of directors turned their attention back to Eleanor, their voices suddenly soft and pleading as they realized their entire stock value was dependent on her cooperation. "Eleanor, we can make this right. We'll give you the CEO chair and whatever compensation you want if you just bring Project Dawn back online," the lead investor whispered with sweat beads forming on his forehead. My sister looked around the boardroom she had occupied for 25 years and gave a slow, deliberate shake of her head that signaled the end of an era. "I have no interest in captaining a sinking ship, but I will allow you to purchase the full intellectual property rights at a price that reflects the true value of my life's work," she responded with absolute finality. This massive settlement was the only bridge she was willing to build for a company that had treated her loyalty as a liability to be discarded. Gregory Sterling collapsed back into his leather chair, a broken man who finally realized that the mysterious smile Eleanor gave him on the day of her firing was his actual death warrant. The battle concluded not with a display of physical force, but through the absolute intellectual superiority of a woman who had been underestimated by every man in that room for far too long. We walked out of the building as the afternoon sun began to dip below the Manhattan skyline, leaving behind a legacy that was finally being liquidated on her own terms. Megan Vance held the final signed settlement papers tightly against her chest, her expression reflecting the same quiet triumph that radiated from Eleanor as we headed toward the waiting car. The revolving doors spun behind us one last time, marking the end of the Sterling Empire and the beginning of a future that Gregory would never be a part of again. The dust from the corporate collapse had barely settled when the morning news cycles across Manhattan began broadcasting the shocking footage of federal agents entering the Sterling Corp skyscraper. 1 month after the systems initially went dark, the business world watched in stunned silence as Gregory Sterling was led out of his own building in handcuffs by the FBI. Both he and Alyssa Thorne were now facing a mountain of federal charges, including interstate financial fraud and a complex conspiracy to misappropriate intellectual property. As the cameras captured his pale and sunken face, a reporter shouted a question about whether he had any regrets regarding his treatment of his former partner. "I built that company from nothing, and I won't let a disgruntled employee destroy my reputation like this," Gregory shouted back, with a voice that lacked any of its former conviction. The long-term prison sentences looming over them were the inevitable consequence of the profound greed and cruelty they had shown toward the most loyal person they ever had in their lives. Eleanor had moved quickly during the aftermath to sell her remaining shares and the full technology rights to a major rival corporation for a staggering sum that reached into the hundreds of millions. She chose to use a significant portion of that wealth to establish a nonprofit foundation dedicated to supporting middle-aged professional women who had been unfairly terminated from their positions. My sister also made sure that Franklin Moore had enough capital to finally launch his own independent cybersecurity firm, ensuring he would never have to answer to an arrogant executive ever again. I never thought I'd see the day when we actually held the keys to our own future without checking with a board first, Franklin Moore said during our celebratory dinner at the estate. "I often watch her now as she moves through the garden of our Hamptons home, looking truly happy and free for the first time in over 2 decades. There are no more urgent phone calls at 3 in the morning and no more layers of corporate deception to navigate while she prunes her favorite roses. The greatest victory isn't the money they had to pay us, Sarah, but the fact that they can no longer steal another minute of my peace," Eleanor remarked while we sat on the porch, watching the sunset over the Atlantic. Her journey serves as a powerful reminder that the value of human intellect and professional integrity are treasures that no amount of corporate maneuvering can ever truly steal. The arrogance and open contempt for the experience of others prove to be the shortest path to the total destruction of those who once considered themselves untouchable. People often mistake the quiet patience and silence of a kind person for a sign of weakness, yet they fail to realize it is often the moment they are preparing a decisive strike. Eleanor Vance taught me that you must always remain vigilant and protect the fruits of your labor with every legal tool available, because trust is often the most expensive luxury in the world of business. I watched Megan Vance organize the final closing documents for the foundation, her smile reflecting the same fierce intelligence that had guided us through the darkest days of the conflict. "We didn't just win a lawsuit, Mom. We actually rewrote the rules of the game for everyone who comes after us," Megan Vance said while handing her mother a glass of lemonade. The legacy of the Sterling name has faded into a cautionary tale of hubris, while Eleanor's new chapter is defined by the lives she is now helping to rebuild. Thank you all so much for listening to the story of my sister's brilliant and calculated journey of justice until these very final moments. I truly appreciate your support throughout this entire series, and I would love for you to leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts on the final fate of Gregory Sterling. Your engagement means the world to us as we close this chapter and look toward the new horizon that Eleanor has so masterfully created for our family. Let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks they can build an empire on the broken spirits of the people who actually know how to run the machinery. The silence in our garden today is not one of defeat, but a profound and lasting peace that was earned through every line of code and every legal battle we fought together. As the lights of the city flicker in the distance, we are reminded that the truth always finds a way to the surface if you have the courage to wait for the right moment.